Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar, No More Apologies, Mastering Multilingual Service in the Support Center. Today's webinar is brought to you by GeoFluent by Lionbridge, and we thank them for their sponsorship. I'm Roy Atkinson, I'll be your moderator today, and we have just a few announcements before we begin. As usual, today's webcast will be available on demand very shortly after we conclude the live broadcast, and you will receive a reminder email giving you access back to the on-demand webcast. You can come back and review all or part of the webcast at any time. You can download the slides from today's presentation and other resources, including an advanced copy of the report on which this webinar is based, by opening the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk screen. You will be able to participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast, and they'll be answered during the Q&A session toward the end. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event on your screen. And remember that you can stay in touch with us on HDI Connect, our member site. You can also find us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter, and join us for HDI Chat every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Twitter, where we discuss various topics that are important to support. Thanks for attending today. Joining me today to talk about this very interesting topic of multilingual support is Tom Zecchi, and he is from Lionbridge, GeoFluent. He's the VP and General Manager of Customer Care Solutions at Lionbridge, and his experience and expertise includes helping organizations implement and leverage language and omni-channel strategies to improve employee, customer, and partner experiences while gaining internal efficiencies. He has a deep background in technology as it relates to communications, analytics, workforce optimization, and he works closely with leaders on strategies to improve care while increasing productivity and satisfaction. Thanks for joining us today, Tom.
Thank you, Roy, and thank you for everyone that is out joined us today.
Okay, why don't you take it away and give us a little overview of some of the things we're going to talk about.
Sounds fantastic. All right, so great. So as I'm out working with companies, generally when it comes to communications, there's typically three major areas within the organization that will struggle as it relates to supporting languages for those areas. So I know today we're going to really focus in on enterprise service management, the IT help desk, ITSM, et cetera. But I also just wanted to bring to light and draw some parallels that I've seen through the years as we look across customer care, across company communications and internal collaboration and communication, if you will, within the organization and with the enterprise service management or the global help desks. So from a trajectory standpoint, enterprise service management really seems to be on a similar trajectory that we saw in customer care and customer experience and contact centers over the last sort of 5-ish to 7 years. So the digitalization that has occurred from customer communications and prospect communications, we're seeing the consumer behavior now. So when I'm out dealing with a brand that I do business with, my expectations for my experience there are, things like I expect real-time responses, I expect my channels to be enabled, I expect personalization, I expect the brand to understand, who I am and what I'm all about and what my questions may be around, and understanding the context of any prior conversations that I've had. So we as consumers in our private life have really brought that into also our employed life, right? So the company that I work for, I have similar expectations now when I'm looking for service across that organization, whether I'm dealing with my HR organization, my IT organization, field service operation, whatever it may be. So what winds up really happening here is because those are my expectations now as an employee, that's now getting pushed down to the help desk and to the service areas to be able to, again, provide self-service support, real-time answers to things beyond the channel of my preference. So we're seeing a lot of parallels of what we had seen take place in customer care, and really still continues, quite honestly, as we see some of the late majority now jumping onto multi-channel solutions and omni-channel solutions in customer care. But really what I look to do now is take some of the things that we learned, and my background is really heavy in contact centers. So taking what we've learned there and applying it into the service desk. And a lot of that really gets into, and we're going to get into some stats around the HDI study here shortly, but from a customer care perspective, the contact centers, even in their advanced state of investment in customer experience, what we find is that only 21% of those organizations are able to support multiple languages, and they are only able to do that over the voice channel. So knowing how we got to where we are in contact center, as I progress through today's presentation, you'll hear me talk a bit about how we can avoid some of the pitfalls so that the service desk doesn't wind up in a similar situation where we've deployed omni-channel, multi-channel solutions. However, we only did it for a single language, and we didn't take other languages into account as we started to deploy new technologies. So just to level set first on, how do companies support? So maybe there's some folks on this webinar that don't have to deal with multiple languages today. Maybe it's going to be a future problem for them. So just to level set on how do companies, of all sizes really, whether you're large, small, or medium, you've got the same options available. And those are the 6 that you're seeing up on the screen. So the first, and I'll just go through these briefly just to level set with everyone. The first is what we call third-party interpretation. That's the concept of somebody has contacted the service desk in a language that we don't currently support, so we don't have any staff that speaks that language. So in order to service that client, we pull in a third-party interpreter to have a 3-way conversation. Other companies will outsource their service desks and basically push it down to a BPO or an IT service management company, where then it's their problem, right, to figure out how do they service the languages. Other companies will have in-country help desks, and that tends to be for a larger organization where I've got a larger employee base or a larger set of folks that may be drawing off that particular language. Next option would be internal translator. So is there somebody that I pull in, maybe they're not part of my help desk, but I go grab somebody out of marketing or out of another area where I know, okay, I've got a Spanish speaker that sits 5 cubes away from me or next quadrant over. I can grab them and have them help me understand what the need is of this individual. And then, a very popular option, of course, at least for the more common languages, is to hire bilingual or multilingual speakers, right? So in the staffing the help desk with those individuals. And then the last is trying to leverage some type of a technology. So, up until now, it's been, some folks will take, let's say, emails or tickets or cases, and they'll leverage a tool like a Google Translate, right, to try to understand what is this question, and then they'll type their response and then try to Google Translate it on the back end. So those are kind of the 6 traditional ways that organizations will try to manage languages. And then getting a bit deeper, so understanding what's available today from an options perspective and understanding some of the consumer expectations. This slide really takes us to the next level, right? So some of the things that I talked about at the beginning of this webinar, the expectations of the consumers and how they're expecting real time, and they want, their preferred channels, they want to be able to self-serve. But also from an organizational perspective, some of the things that we've done also have added to language challenges, right? So when we think about folks that have taken their IT help desk and offshored it to a location where, English is the primary language, or maybe there's only a few languages that are spoken, it's very difficult to find other language speakers in those locations. Things like, again, a contact center concept that we're now seeing on the service desk side is the understanding of, as a user, somebody that needs help, what is the process, right? What does that process look like for them? How long does it take us to get them a response? How long does it take us to resolve that? So what companies have tended to do there is, as they look at that experience and at that journey, they tend to only look at it from a primary language speaker's perspective. So they're missing out on the other part of the organization that may not speak the primary language of the help desk or of the company. So there's folks that don't fall into that category, and any expectations or things that we've learned, any improvements that we've made through the mapping, generally don't benefit the individuals that don't speak that language. And then, of course, many of us are going through the process or already have gone through the process of adding more digital channels, more self-service channels, and on this quest to become more omni-channel and really carry that conversation cross-channel. And so, again, taking into account what does that mean from a language speaker's perspective is generally organizations will deploy those over their primary language, and they won't deploy it across additional languages. Other things like collaboration tools, user forums, communities, FAQs, again, we have similar challenges. So if we think about a forum, generally the forums are going to be siloed by language. So you're going to find most of your information in the primary language of the organization, and then you're going to find very few entries in other languages. So essentially what that means is I, as a Korean speaker, may jump onto the forum, ask a question. I don't find my question or my answer, even though it's sitting there in the primary language. So we have to really break down these silos across languages to enable some of these self-service tools to become valid. The same is going to be true for things like chatbots, right? So I'm going to deploy a chatbot. Most companies are deploying it in their primary language, and it's available for the primary speakers, but if you don't speak that language, you can't use that tool. So again, just setting the stage here, I'm going to get into some more details around what do we do about this and how do we enable some of these channels across languages. But for the moment, I'm now going to pass it over to Roy, now that we've level set on how things are and given you a bit of a peak of interest here of where we're going to take this conversation. But first, let's get into some of the stats and data that we've learned through this study.
Thank you, Tom. So just in general about the study, we have 381 completed surveys. So we had more than that, of course, and we scrubbed off the ones that people didn't finish or didn't get most of the way through. We have some methodology that we put around that. 23 countries involved, and 30 different industries responded to the survey. And you can see here the split, which is a question that we usually ask in our annual survey as well. Do you have a single site in a single country? Do you have multiple sites in a single country, or do you have multiple countries? And you can see the breakdown there. 41% have a single site in a single country, like one support center in the United States or one support center in whatever country. But a fairly good split to give us an idea of how people are dealing with the various languages. So we asked if multilingual support is a priority. So we're going to ask you that question, in fact. We are going to ask you whether or not it is a priority for you. So as you can see, you have a poll there. It's yes or no, or maybe somewhat of a priority. How does your organization feel about providing multilingual support? Is it becoming more of a priority for you? Is it a high priority now? I'll just give us an idea of where your organizations are asking the same question that we asked in the survey, and then we'll talk about the results of the survey a little bit. Maybe a few more seconds to respond, and just a few more. See if we get some more results. Okay, we're going to stop the voting now and take a peek at the results. And so, okay, so 56% of you said it is a priority, and 4% said no, it's not, and 40% said somewhat of a priority, which makes sense. You're coming to this webinar to get information about multilingual support, and so it's not really surprising that for a lot of you it's either a priority already or it's somewhat of a priority. Thanks for responding to that. So let's take a look at the results here. For 71.5%, so not too far off 3/4 of the respondents, they said it was a priority. And it's a very interesting comment that we capture a lot of verbatim comments in the survey, and we feel that we do not have the necessary tools to help some of our non-English speaking users. And really creating a language barrier that causes frustration on both sides. So it's never a good thing to have a frustrated customer or user. And so one of the ways to eliminate that frustration is to make sure that you're talking in the same language. Literally, you're talking in the same language as a customer. So we actually have another vote for you, and let's see how that works out. How do you currently handle the contacts that are not in your support center's primary language? Do you, A, apologize and attempt to support in your primary language? Do you provide a scripted response and then no further support? Do you use Google Translate or something similar to that? Or do you route the contact to multilingual staff inside the organization? Or do you have real-time translation software in place at this point? So how do you handle multilingual support as of today? And then we'll compare with the results of the study that we just completed. Give you another few seconds to answer. Okay, I'm going to stop the voting now. We just had a bunch come in at the last minute. Great, that's terrific. So 13% of you apologize and attempt to support. None of you provide a scripted response and no further support. That's good. That compares favorably with our results from the survey that we did. About 21% Google Translate. Route to multilingual staff within the organization. 58% of you, that's a very high choice. And then some of you, 8%, are using real-time translation software. Thanks for answering those questions. We really appreciate that. It's just a quick comparison with our results from the survey. So as you can see, about 15%, a little more than 15%, actually apologized and attempted to provide support. And then about 7% provides a scripted response, which is really, that's got to be very frustrating for the caller or the person who's contacting you for support, to get just a scripted response and no further support is attempted. Find someone in the company or organization who can speak or translate the language is a little more than a quarter. Google Translate is a popular choice as well, as it was in our little quick poll, about a third or a little less than a third. Customized real-time translation software, a little less than 7% of you route the contacts to a translation service. A few more, 13% of you do that. 13% of you also do voice only via third party. And then route contacts to multilingual analysts inside the organization is the big choice. That's more than half of the organizations that we surveyed. That's the way the contacts are handled. And then a few others. So very interesting breakdown, a little bit different from today's quick poll results, but you can see across the board how there are very many different ways to do this, and it's not always a great solution. Providing a scripted response and then offering no further support is obviously not a real good solution to handling multilingual contacts. So here are the biggest challenges. We asked companies what their biggest challenges in providing multilingual support were. Real-time translation quality was tough. The cost of hiring staff or outsourcing it, a lot of them said that was the biggest challenge that they had. But the overwhelming one, really, not quite overwhelming, but the majority here was finding and retaining multilingual analysts. That was the big choice. And so that's always tough. If you have a multilingual analyst who can handle, let's say they can speak 2 or 3 languages in which you provide support, and then they leave the organization. Well, how do you replace that? Now you're looking for somebody who has those exact same language skills. So finding and retaining them is a really tough challenge for about 42% of the organizations that responded. And another one is inability to justify adding new language support. So if you can't build the business case, by telling your superiors, your senior management, that it's going to make people happier or it's going to make your analysts happier, then you have to provide some kind of a basis to justify that new language support, and that's a tough challenge. So those are the challenges that people talked about when we asked them. So this is a really, really big result as far as I'm concerned, because we're all after better customer satisfaction, and a lot of us at least are chasing first contact resolution. We want to make that as high as possible because it's less costly, it's better for the customers, et cetera. So 73% of the respondents said that if they looked at multilingual support separately in their customer satisfaction surveys, 73% of respondents said the CSAT scores were better if they provided support in the customer's language. It makes perfect sense when you think about it, right? And about 46% said first contact resolution was better. Why? Because the communication is better. They can understand what the customer is asking, and the customer can understand their instructions or their directions better. And so those quality scores are better. Okay? So consistent data sharing. So if you have a knowledge base, but you don't localize it into different languages, but you have multilingual people looking at the knowledge base, if you provide self-service knowledge, self-help, obviously it's going to be better if people can read or look at articles or listen to video content in their own language. So if you're not doing that, the data sharing is not going to be consistent. So knowledge management is also a case for multilingual support. And here's where it's really interesting. And analysts really like supporting customers in their native languages, overwhelmingly. There's a good overwhelming, right? 88.3%. Surprisingly, 8.4% said no, we don't know why, but there they are. And then a very tiny percentage said people are routed out of the support organization, so they never get the challenge. However, one of the things we also know about analysts being happy and being contented in the way they're doing the work is that they're providing better customer service. CSAT scores tend to be about 5% higher on average if you have analysts who are satisfied or very satisfied with their work. So those happy analysts who like supporting customers in native languages are also going to get higher CSAT scores, and that's probably the origin of some of those higher CSAT scores that 73% of the organizations said that they had. So really interesting findings here in terms of customer service and how you are providing the support to the customers and how the customers are liking it, and they really are. So both the analysts and customers are really enjoying the fact that they can do support and get support in their native language, even if it's the non-primary language of your organization. So here's how it breaks down across levels. About 25% of organizations provide multilingual support only at level 1, a little lower for level 1 and 2, about a third, a little more than a third for levels 1, 2, and desktop support, but only 20% provided across all the different groups. So that means that support's going to be a little bit uneven, right? If you catch at level 1 and you can get that multilingual support there, or if you're in desktop support and about a third of the organizations are providing the multilingual support in levels 1, 2, and desktop, that's good. But only 20% provided across all escalation groups. So if your ticket gets escalated and you require or want multilingual support, it might be a much tougher job. It's kind of an interesting breakdown. Companies are adding new channels over the next couple of years, and we asked about that. And a majority of the organizations do not plan to provide multilingual support to the new channels that they're adding. And those new channels might be things like SMS, text. It might be a mobile app. It might be chat. But in any event, they're not planning on adding language support to those new channels, which we found kind of interesting as well. Considering the fact that a lot of organizations think of multilingual support as a priority, it's kind of counterintuitive that they wouldn't be providing multilingual support in the new channels, but that's what they're saying. They're not going to do it, at least as the plans exist at this point. So let's talk about this a little bit. 23% are looking to add languages within 1 year. 1/5 offering multilingual support at all escalations of groups. So that's the stat that I just referenced. And multilingual support is most likely to be offered over the phone. Now, that kind of makes sense, although if you think about it, it's all language, whether it's text or mobile app or email or chat, whatever channel those contacts are coming in, there's language involved, generally speaking. And so we think about it in terms of the telephone right off the bat, but there are other channels as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this develops over the next couple of years. And I urge you to get a copy of the report. Again, there's an advanced copy of the report in your attachments folder, and you can download that today. All right, so now I'm going to hand it back over to Tom, and he's going to talk about how best-in-class companies handle all these issues. And we'll wrap it up. Okay, Tom, take it away.
Great, thanks, Roy. So clearly we all know anecdotally, language is going to be a key part of any personalized experience, right? It's going to be very difficult to give a personalized experience if I don't speak your language, right? So, at the core, best-in-class companies clearly understand this and they're taking action on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cover how best-in-class companies are managing support and some of the tricks and techniques that they're using today. And then the last section I'm going to end with, for those of us, the rest of us, right, that aren't best-in-class companies, how do we get started, right? So what's the track that we need to start thinking about? What are some steps that we need to start taking so that we can start to provide that better experience across all these languages and become a best-in-class customer experience? So the first thing that what I find is that best-in-class companies are doing is they're looking at, and again, you probably recognize some of the alternatives here. So these are essentially, ways that I can support, right? So the first is representing over-the-phone interpretation. The next is in-country support. The next is the BPO or outsourcer, et cetera. So what the best-in-class companies do is they'll break down their languages and they'll look at interaction volumes. Right, so they'll look at what are my low volume languages, what are my medium volume languages, what are my high volume languages. And then based on the volumes within those languages, they're picking the best way to support that. So in other words, if I have 20 languages that my employees or my constituents speak, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to support those 20 languages in the same fashion, right? So to take a simple example of what that means, if I have 20 languages, one of them I get one interaction per day, and my approach is to hire multilingual speakers or in-country support. I don't necessarily want to sit there and say, oh, you know what, I need to hire someone in-country to support that one case per day, right? They're clearly going to be significantly underutilized. My cost per resolution is going to be through the roof. So it's really important that we segregate and start to look at languages on a volume basis to then understand and match what is the appropriate way for me to support this language when, taking cost, taking customer experience, taking everything into account, I'm going to apply the right approach to each language. So you can see that some of the banding here, and I won't get into great detail on any which one, but the idea here is if I take a simple example, if it's a high volume language, clearly it's going to make sense for me to have in-country support for that language. And the reason why I say that is, let's say I'm based in the U.S. and I've got a very large Korean population and I get a lot of interactions from Korean speakers. So I can either hire multilingual Korean speakers here in the U.S. and then I've got to worry about how do I find the talent, how do I keep them happy, how do I retain them, some of the challenges that you saw in the study. I need to worry about hours of service. How do I service overnight hours, right? Because that's when I'm going to get the majority of my inquiries from my Korean staff. So it's going to make more logical sense for me to put the staff in Korea where I can find the Korean speakers easily and I can support the hours of coverage that I primarily need. So that's just a simple example of how companies are thinking about this, right? So again, you're parsing it out by volume and then looking at what are my alternatives and what's going to be most cost efficient and provide the best experience for my users. So the second thing that I wanted to share with you, and so this was a study that was done with Aberdeen, and Aberdeen looked at how does technology influence the ability to support languages, and what does it mean for an organization when they're leveraging technology to solve the language challenge, instead of using humans and trying to staff across multiple languages. So you can see some quick results from the study. 162 global companies took place. 21% said they used technology for multilingual communications. Another 20% said they're considering it. The important stat here really is the 21% that are using it, the results that they're finding are pretty astounding, right? So they're saying there's a 6.4% cost reduction or cost improvement when they deploy the technology to handle multilingual communications, as opposed to the other 79% that aren't using technology that are seeing a 1.9% increase, right? So there's clear benefit from a costing perspective. Now, we'll talk about some of the other factors like the experience side, resolution, et cetera. But from a pure cost perspective, the numbers are pretty staggering, right? So technology can be a very cost-effective solution to managing some of these language challenges that I have as an organization. So as far as how do they deploy the technology and what does it mean to leverage technology to help solve my challenge? So what a lot of large global organizations are doing is they're looking at languages, and if you remember back from the first slide when I kicked things off, there was contact center, there was enterprise service management, and there was enterprise collaboration communication. So a global organization that recognizes this isn't just a help desk problem, this isn't just an IT service desk problem, this is a wider organizational problem. And so what they do is they look at it from a corporate perspective. So what I need to do is look at this from a bigger, take a step back and look across my organization and all the communication language barriers that exist. How can I solve for them? So what organizations are doing is they're starting to build up what I'm calling a linguistic knowledge base. So it's an understanding of brand speak, terminologies, everything that may exist across some of these communication channels, across these forums, across the communications that are occurring, and building this centralized understanding and knowledge base across these languages that can then be leveraged across different parts of the organization. So you're seeing here the bullets, some of the organization parts of the organization that will plug into the central linguistic center. So whether you're in marketing or field service ops or service management, contact center, right, we all have this language barrier problem, and every piece of the organization that's contributing to the centralized linguistic knowledge base is then benefiting the entire organization. So I don't want to discourage anyone that's on the phone that may run an ITSM desk, right? It's not saying that you can't leverage technology to help solve that problem, but it's also saying maybe you're the thought leader, right, and you're going to drive this into the organization. You're going to leverage it, but then what you'll find over time is other parts of the organization will start to go, oh, hey, you know what, we could really use that as well, and hey, do you mind if we piggyback on top of that, right? So other parts of the organization can benefit. So whether you're an organization where it's going to be driven at the enterprise level or it's going to be driven at the use case level and then, perhaps broaden from there, I see it happen both ways across organizations. And, the benefit then of having this linguistic knowledge base is as I deploy new channels, things like chatbots, things like virtual assistants, all you need to do then is then plug into the centralized linguistic base, and now I can start to do what I call omnilingual enable these channels. So if I'm going to deploy a chatbot and my knowledge base is in German, and therefore it's technically a German chatbot, I can start to leverage technology that will provide real-time translation on the front end of this solution. So now anybody of any language can type their message. Let's say I'm Korean. I'm going to type my question to the chatbot in Korean. Behind the scenes, that's going to real-time translate using the centralized linguistic knowledge base. It's going to then feed into the chatbot in German. I'm going to get the answer back from the chatbot in German, and it's going to real-time translate back to the visitor or to the customer in Korean. So I'm able to then, again, omnilingual enable any channel that I deploy when I have this type of a technology solution in place. So another thing that I see companies doing as another avenue here, so you heard me talk about this sort of second generation AI translation centralized knowledge base that I just spoke about. The other piece is leveraging the interpretation services that I talked about at the beginning. So what happened in the contact center is as companies deployed technology and additional channels as part of their omni-channel solution, they tended to leave the other language speakers where they already were. And the common solution is using an interpretation service. So if I call into my favorite brand and I don't speak their language, I tend to get put on hold and then I tend to wait a few minutes, and then I get an interpreter on the phone, and then we have a three-way conversation. So contact centers kind of left that in place as they were deploying self-service and digital channels. So what it really kept was a language gap that meant if I don't speak the primary language of that organization, I pretty much have to do voice, and I have to go with an interpretation call, which generally is not a great customer experience. It's going to take a lot longer, right? It's a three-way conversation. It's going to take at least twice as long. So we have got an opportunity here as the service desk to really not let that happen and start to leverage technology with over-the-phone interpretation services so that I'm able to offer all channels. So as I deploy additional channels, I'm able to leverage technology as my answer to support all languages that are occurring. And you can see, some of the benefits that the best-in-class companies get out of that, right? So it's broader coverage because I can have any of my agents from anywhere in the world support any customer. So I'm really looking more for the skill and the ability of my agent rather than do they speak the primary language, right? And I can start to get into more regional centers of excellence as opposed to separate centers in every country. Again, I can start using my self-service and digital channels to deflect some of those inbound calls, again, saving me money on the interpretation service that I would be paying for on the voice channel. So just to give you a few examples of very large global companies that followed this path and some of the things that they have done. So the first here is a financial services company that has a global service desk, but it was a centralized service desk. And what they were finding is they had sales folks, they had financial analysts, they had other folks out meeting with customers. So let's say, they're in Germany meeting with their German customer. They would get asked questions by their prospect or their customer that they don't know the answer to. What would wind up happening is they would send an email ticket in that would take, 24 to 48 hours to respond to because it was in German. So what they did was they deployed real-time translation technology enabled chat. And so now when that German rep is out speaking to this prospect or customer, in real time they're getting answers. So even though there's nobody in Germany servicing that desk that can answer the question, they're real-time chatting, so typing their question in German. It's getting real-time translated back to the central desk. The central desk, no matter what language the speaker is on the other end, is getting it in their language. So let's say they're English speaking. They get the question in English, they real-time type back the English answer, it real-time translates back to German. So now I'm able to provide my customers and my prospects with real-time answers to their questions, and I've removed the language barrier in that circumstance. The second very large global healthcare company leveraging outsourced help desk. So they've outsourced their help desk, and what they were finding is, similar to what I talked about at the beginning of the call, is they were staffing for all languages, even though there were a significant portion of the over 30 languages that they needed that had very few interactions per day. So in essence, what they were doing is they were paying for FTEs, and there was very little volume on those languages, but they knew it was important. They had to service those employees that speak those other languages. But when you look at the cost per incident or the cost per resolution, it's 10 to 20x some of the other languages. So they needed to find a solution. So again, they're leveraging technology to real-time translate incidents, cases, no matter what language it's from. It's doing skills-based routing on that case or ticket, making a determination, routing to the best agent, and then real-time translating that to whatever that agent's language is. When the agent responds to that ticket or that case, again, it real-time translates back into the original language of the ticket or the inquiry. So in summary, what we're seeing best-in-class companies do, again, match the volumes to the solutions as we talked about, leveraging technology, as you saw from that Aberdeen study. There's significant cost advantages to doing so. You're also providing a much better customer experience because now you can open up all your agents to support every customer regardless of the language. Using that centralized linguistic knowledge base that I talked about, and now offering really what I call, again, omnilingual or language agnostic channels, both digital agent channels and self-service channels. So enabling those to become valuable for everyone within the organization. So you heard me earlier talk about a forum, how it's going to be siloed by language. When you deploy technology into that forum that provides that real-time translation, now every post is now searchable and readable across anybody. So essentially you're removing the language barrier and you're creating a single topic thread. So in other words, I may come in, ask a question. I may be reading a thread that has 26 posts. Inside of that 26 posts, there may be 14 different languages posted. So now I come in as a Korean speaker, and I view that. I'm seeing the 26 posts in Korean. I may type a 27th response in Korean. Now a Portuguese speaker goes and searches for that. They see all 27 in Portuguese, right? So you're really multilingual enabling that forum and making it much more valuable and much more likely for any constituent to find the answer they're looking for. And therefore, again, you're deflecting that inbound call. You're saving your agent time. You're saving voice time. You're saving costs. You're providing a much faster, better customer experience. So for those of us that aren't the best-in-class companies, what do we do, right? How do we get there? What do we do to get started? So here's some tips that we've developed in working with our clients. So really, the important thing here is looking at the factors the same way we would with a primary speaker. So if I'm an English-speaking company and I think about what really impacts customer satisfaction for my English speakers, it's going to be very similar as far as how we should approach it for our other language speakers, right? So, and this gets into, again, if we go back to our concept of journey mapping, really looking at journeys by language, right? And how different are they? And you heard Roy talk about some of the statistics. So of companies that have measured and looked at the metrics by language, companies are astonished at how very different CSAT and FCR and some of the other key metrics are when you start to look across languages, right? So the idea here is, if I think about this from all language speakers, how easy is it to report? Is my channel available? How quickly till someone responds to it? How much total effort is it for me to get this resolved? Does the agent able to understand what my issue is, and are they able to take action on it? Am I provided with accurate information? Am I getting handed off a bunch? Is the context, again, getting into that omnilingual story, as I'm passed off, is the context of what I'm looking for and what I need getting passed, or do I need to keep re-explaining myself, right? And then is it resolved? And then, of course, the ultimate time to resolution is going to be critical, right? So if we look at these across languages, that's really the best way to get started, quite honestly. You're going to start to understand where are your gaps, how consistent of an experience are we providing, taking language out of the mix, and, are my language speakers that aren't primary, are they suffering, and is it a dreadful experience every time that they need help from my desk? So as far as how we get started, so obviously the first step we're going to need to take is making sure that we can have a mechanism in place where we can track and quantify the languages that are being requested, right? So if I'm just getting interactions and I have no way to even recognize what languages are folks looking for, then I've got a problem, right? I don't know what my volumes look like. I don't know what demand is by language. Maybe I can get some stats across my employee base to understand, what % of my employees speak which languages. Generally, you can know folks by country, right? So you may know your employees by country. Many of us know that just because I'm from a particular country doesn't mean that I speak a particular language. There may be multiple languages in that country. I may have a different language preference than the language that's spoken in my country. So there's a lot of factors to take into account here. So really the best thing to do is the ability to track the requested languages that I'm getting. And then as I talked about on the prior slides, really being able to then measure and dissect across these. So if I look at some of the key metrics, how different are they by language? And then that's going to help me hone in on where do I need to do some work on my journey. What languages do I need to be better at supporting? And then what mechanisms do I need to take, again, based on volumes. So the journey mapping, the surveying, determining the gaps. We talked about the staffing options, so that's going to apply once I've got all these metrics in place. And then like anything, it's going to be a rinse and repeat, right? So let's pick the biggest gaps first. Let's focus and hone in on those, and then let's continue to optimize and expand from there. So with that, we left 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'm going to turn it back to Roy, and we will open it up to all of you. So please fire off as many questions as you have.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. We've got a couple of really interesting questions here. Excuse me. We support 17 different languages across the world, and it's done 100% with in-house multilingual co-workers. It's quite difficult as volume goes up to support all of these, and right now we're struggling to recruit Russian speakers as an example. What are the best options we have to help leverage the staffing challenges and also to ensure that whatever translation tool we could use to help us actually translates accurately, unlike Google Translate?
Well, great. Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and that's pretty typical of what we hear from organizations. And as you saw in the study, clearly it's difficult to attract and retain some of these multilingual speakers, particularly if you're doing it out of a centralized location or outside of country, right? So particularly if you're looking for Russian speakers and you don't have a center in Russia, it's going to be quite difficult in some geographies to find those Russian speakers. So really, I think the slide that I talked about where there's over-the-phone interpretation and technology is probably a great solution for you. I'd have to obviously get more into your specific situation and some of the challenges, but anecdotally, you can use things like over-the-phone interpretation for overflow, right? So if you have a baseline staff that, let's say, covers your valleys and maybe your midpoints in your volumes, then you've got a good core base for covering a lot of the interactions that you need to. However, there's going to be times where you run into peaks. Rather than staffing to peak, right, which isn't going to be cost effective and which none of us really want to do ultimately, you can leverage things like over-the-phone interpretation to manage the peaks for you, right? And that's a great approach, very cost-effective approach, because what winds up happening is you're only paying for the interpretation services when you're using it. So it's a per-minute charge. So if you get 2 overflow or 5 overflow calls a day, you clearly don't want to add staff for that. You'd rather overflow that to something like an interpretation service where I can have any agent grab that interaction, pull in an interpreter, and then be able to service that client in real time. So it provides a real-time response in a cost-efficient manner, again, to manage your peaks, where you've already got a good baseline for managing your day-to-day volume. And then on the digital channel side, when you're deploying technology, the best way to really ensure that you're going to get great quality is to use a second-generation translation solution. So, everybody's hearing about machine learning nowadays and artificial intelligence. So now solutions are available in the marketplace that will allow you to train and customize the linguistic engine so that it understands your brand speak. It takes and ingests all of, prior interactions that you may have across your chat line. It ingests all that. It starts to understand what your lingo is, what your acronyms are, your products, your terminology, your brand speak. So it really does start to learn your brand lingo and your interaction lingo, and it gets better as you go, right? So part of the machine learning algorithm is, you continue to train it, and so it'll continue to get better and better. So those are sort of some quick anecdotal thoughts on your situation, but happy to get deeper in offline.
And from my perspective, I'd just add that you're certainly not alone. As we mentioned before when I talked about some of the stats that are in the report, over 41% of organizations have the challenge of finding and retaining multilingual employees to support the languages that they're providing from their support center. So you are certainly not alone. It's a big challenge. Okay, another question, and you'll be glad to hear this, Tom. We're in the process of rolling out GeoFluent machine translation through chat, where the agents type in English and the system translates to the user's native language. A potential situation was raised where our English-speaking agents may request desktop sharing to see the end user's screen. What do you suggest when we do when the end user's OS is in another language? How can we provide seamless support when our agents don't understand the language on the user's screen? That's a great question.
That is a fantastic question. So thank you for that. Honestly, the best situation in there, so assuming that I've started with the chat, now I've gone to a screen share situation, the best thing to do in that situation is to stay in the screen share and then escalate to a voice interpreter. So one of the services that you can get a hold of, right, so I'm sitting there, I'm chatting, let's say I'm chatting with a Korean speaker, I'm an English speaker, they share their Korean screen, I have no idea what it says. You escalate up into the voice interpreter channel, pull in a Korean interpreter to then help with the three-way conversation. So it's a great way to, you're essentially staying in channel but adding an additional channel, but again, providing a real-time way to service that client and provide a real-time answer and solution to them. So that is absolutely what I would recommend there. So again, escalating up to an interpreter to have that three-way conversation while the screen share is ongoing.
Thanks, Tom. Let me see if I understand this next question correctly. It says, what is the industry standard breakdown per support channel? Phone, chat, self-service. So I think what you're asking is what channels are used more, what percentages, and so forth, and it really isn't an industry standard for that, but we do collect statistics on that for our annual practices and salary reports. If you're an HDI member, you can get a copy of that report from connect.thinkhdi.com. Boy, I had trouble with that URL. So I can tell you that as of last year, we do this survey toward the end of each year, and the 2016 stats show that about 9% of ticket volume coming in through chat, about 47% through phone, about 33% through email, 13% through text message. Video chat is actually getting pretty popular. That shows as 20% of the ticket volume came in through video chat now. So chat's getting more popular. And about 11% from walk-up. So I think that's what you're asking is how these channels break down. Self-service, we don't have a stat for that because a lot of organizations don't see it. Unless they're doing web analysis, they don't see when the customer is going to self-service and resolving their own ticket or resolving their own issue, answering their own question. The ticket doesn't get generated at all. They never contact support, and so they don't have visibility into that unless they do some web analysis. So they won't have a stat to report. But that's a really interesting question, and I guess you're trying to figure out exactly how it breaks down and what the language support per channel would be. And Tom, maybe you can talk about that in light of the fact that, you know, about 47% of the contacts last year came in through telephone, which is going down, by the way. Each year it goes down a little bit, and the other channels become a little bit more popular. But maybe you can address that a little bit and how the language support breaks down across those channels.
Yeah, it's certainly a great question. So as you would imagine, as it relates to, enabling language solutions by channel, it's obviously going to be very reflective of the channel adoption itself. So what we tend to see across service desks is, of course, with phone, that's been the traditional, as we talked about. I would say the next one that we are seeing the most of would absolutely be chat. So we see chat deployed across multiple languages typically. We're really seeing the technology side of language translation take off in the chat space. You know, it's a very viable solution when we're dealing with chat, right? As you would imagine, any machine's not going to be perfect, even though it's, an intelligent machine intelligence. It's not going to provide perhaps a perfect translation in every situation. Chat is more, do I understand the context of the conversation? Is it actionable? Is it understandable? And can I react to it? So it's a great deployment for real-time translation where I can enable, again, that real-time service across any language. On the self-service front, as I'm sure everyone on the phone is seeing, we're really starting to see virtual assistants and chatbots take off. They still tend to be more on the early adopter, early majority. But I'm amazed, honestly, at how fast I'm seeing it get deployed. And what I'm seeing with large organizations is they're tending to deploy some of the newer channels like the chatbot in the service desk first, right, as their employees will tend to be a bit more forgiving of them before they roll it out into the contact center, right? So they're testing it, if you will, on their employee base as opposed to testing it where they could have, retention or revenue loss issues in posting it out to the contact center, making it available to their clients first. Which makes sense, right? I mean, it's a great test bed, if you will, to have your own employees try it out before you roll it out to your paying customer base. And then things like forums and FAQs, we're absolutely starting to see those take off as well, especially from an omnilingual perspective. it starts to make them much more valuable and important. So I don't have specific anecdotal, anything other than anecdotal on that. I'd have to go back and actually look through some of our data to determine, percent adoptions across all, but I'd say, chat is a bit more of a commonplace, and some of the self-service chatbots and things are more on the emerging side. And then, of course, phone is pretty well established.
Thanks, Tom. And actually, I think the same person has responded saying we currently see 55% of ticket volume from phone, which is a little higher than the overall industry average, but in the ballpark. 23% from chat, 23% self-service, self-submitted incidents. Okay, so what we see across the industry is about 19% of web forms that get filled out and submitted for self-service. We're currently looking to increase chat support, aiming for 60%. Is this too aggressive a target? Well, that really depends on your user base. That's a question of adoption, and I would suggest strongly that you get your marketing department involved. Chat can be a terrific solution for a lot of situations, but it's not ideal everywhere all the time. And I know that some organizations have had extremely high response to chat, much higher than they expected, but nothing like 60%. About the highest that I've heard about is about 30% or a little bit more. So we see CSAT for chat is lower than phone. How can we improve that? Well, that's probably a question of working closely with your customers to find out why they're not as satisfied with chat as they are on the phone. Maybe it's just a question of the tool. Maybe it's a question of the lag time in between when they ask the question and they get an answer. It might be a staffing level issue. It might be the facility of the person who's chatting, typing out the correct answers. Are they understandable? Are they using abbreviations that the user doesn't understand, et cetera? So might be a little bit of coaching involved in there if you want to get chat up. But chat is probably a good way to do multilingual support. Tom, would you agree with that? Chat is a perfect seedbed for multilingual support?
I would, yeah, and I think the thing to keep in mind here, so as we see those stats on the 60% too aggressive and, the CSAT being lower on chat, I think it's important to understand the how technical of a conversation is it, right? So what we're finding is things like self-service, chatbots are great for very simple queries. If it's slightly more difficult and requires some human intervention, chat's a great channel. But if it's going to be an intense conversation, technical back and forth, there needs to be a lot of explaining. Voice is still going to be the most effective channel. So I think it's going to be important that no matter what channels you deploy and what you're trying to do, that it's important that you do provide an escalation avenue, right? So I may start in a chat and then quickly make a determination. So this is getting very technical. This is going to go a lot quicker and easier if we jump on the phone, right? And have an easy escalation path where I, as the agent, can still continue to have an interaction with that individual, so I don't have to tell them to call into a phone number or have somebody else call them back, right? So all the context of everything we just talked about on the chat line will stay with me. We'll jump to the voice channel. If we need an interpreter, we'll do that. If we're talking same language to same language, we'll escalate to voice and we'll resolve that way.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, thank you for attending today's webinar. I would ask you please to take a look at GeoFluent and join us on Tuesday, July 18th for our next HDI webinar with Doug Tedder about metrics, measures, and KPIs. And please take a moment to rate today's webinar. It's extremely important. It really helps us plan for the future. This webcast is copyright 2017 by United Business Media, LLC. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if that's the case, by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of HDI and GeoFluent, thanks for your time and have a great day.